Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar, Law Department Operations Managing in the New Economy. This is one of a series of webinars that we are producing in conjunction with the annual Law Department Operations Survey. Before we get going, let me introduce today's faculty. I'm Brad Blickstein. I'm principal at the Blickstein Group and also the publisher of the Law Department Operations Survey each year. We also have Ashley Smith. She's Managing Director of Legal Business Services at Deloitte Transaction and Business Analytics. And Jerry Levine, Chief Evangelist. Levangelist, I think that might be your new title, Jerry.
Levangelist, I like
He's
that.
the Levangelist. He's the Chief Evangelist and General Counsel at Contract Pod AI. So welcome, Ashley, and welcome, Jerry.
Thank you.
Brad.
I want to talk just for a minute, lay out the history of the survey. I think likely most folks on the line, have seen this before, or know what we do. The annual Law Department Survey, 15 years old, provides insights into the critical success factors of managing corporate law departments. It's a big survey, 300 data points, more than 100 questions, and we're really proud that it's taken off as well as it has over all the embarrassingly long time that we've had it in play here. Can't be done without our survey advisory board. I saw a couple of our friends on the advisory board in the audience today. We're excited that you guys are here. These are the people that keep us intellectually honest, that help us develop the questionnaires, that help us drive response, and are really some of the leading lights, really, in my opinion, among legal operations professionals. You ever have an opportunity to meet any of these folks at a conference? There's CLOC coming up, there's Legal Week. Anyone would be edified if they got to know any of these folks. Similarly, cannot be done without our sponsors. We have representatives from Deloitte and Contract Pod AI with us in the faculty today, but there's other sponsors as well with us as well. Again, not only provide financial support and underwriting to us, but also ideas, drive response, help us figure out what we should do, and keep us, again, intellectually honest in the publication. So thank you to all our sponsors, especially to Deloitte and Contract Pod AI, who are in the room right now. Today's agenda, we're going to spend just a couple of minutes on survey demographics, and then we're going to talk about most, if not all, of these topics. We'll see how the timings work out. We're committed to being done in an hour, including a Q&A session. So please feel free to get your questions ready and type them into the console. We all know how Zoom webinar works. We'll start with survey demographics. We'll talk a little bit about budgets and rates in law departments, relationships with outside counsel, technology, and then specifically contract management. And then we're going to spend a few minutes on future challenges for legal operations professionals. The plan is we have pulled some of the more interesting data out of the survey results. We'll talk a little bit about a few data points, or I'll probably sort of explain or comment on a few data points, and then we'll open it up to discussion amongst the three of us around sort of what we think that means, what we're seeing out there among the folks that we talk to all the time, and maybe a little bit about what the future looks like. And finally, and questions from you. So please don't hesitate to interject with questions. We'll either answer them at the end or in line during the discussion, depending on the timings and how it all works out. So let's get going. I want to start with a little bit about the survey demographics. 79 people responded to the survey this year. It was in the field last October, November. And what's maybe important is that it's one per company. We only allow one response per company. We asked for it to be the top legal ops professional at that company, but whomever it is, it's only one per company. So 79 companies responded to our survey this year. They are across all kinds of industries. A full 20% or 21% are in technology, 12% in manufacturing, but really a very nice cross-section of various industries are represented among our respondent set. Similarly, in terms of global revenue, about 40% are less than $1 billion, and another 20% are under $5 billion, but the remaining roughly 40% of the respondents are reasonably big companies, $5 billion or more, all the way up to a good 10% are $50 billion companies or more. So again, wide range of geography. Well, it is a wide range of geography, but what we've seen is wide range of industry, wide range of revenue. So I don't think any discussion of legal operations can commence these days without talking about rates and budgets, certainly not one where we're talking about managing through a new economy. So a couple of data points I want to cover, and then we're going to talk about these, and I'll stop talking for a minute. We asked what our respondents expect their legal spend, their external spend to change in the next year. And no surprise here. And again, the 2022 data, the new data is on the left. Almost no one, actually a small percentage, a reasonable percentage, things that their external legal spend is going to decrease. That's my guess, is under pressure from CFO types. But most, a good chunk of the audience, a majority, believes that rates are going to go up. About 40% or 39%. They'll go up less than 10%, but a full 22%, which is substantially more than last year, believe that their that their external spend is going to go up. At least 22% 22% that it will go up at least 10%, which is a pretty big, even in an era where law firms are raising rates and everyone's under pressure, 22% expected, 10% change in spend is still a lot. So maybe let's start with Ashley, maybe if you want to go first, but we'll talk a minute about the sort of rate increases, but what are you seeing out there? Are your clients expecting to be for their budgets to go up or down, or up whether they like it or not, or down whether they want it to or not? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think there's a course correction that's happening as people kind of re-enter negotiations with their outside counsel and vendors after COVID. I've seen a lot of companies who put their vendor management programs on pause slightly in terms of updating timekeepers and rates during COVID. They were trying to understand kind of the workforce of the future and how people are going to be working remotely and all of those things. So I certainly see a refresh happening right now, certainly with the clients that I'm working with. I also think that there's been a strategic shift in the sourcing of legal work, and more clients are looking at identifying strategic partners where they're looking to be comfortable spending a little bit more to get that high level work, and then also looking at their foundational ALSPs or managed services programs, kind of bringing that in line. So I think they're going up in some areas and then trying to control costs in those foundational areas. Jerry, what about you? What do you see from this?
Yeah, I generally agree with you, Ashley. I think that there is that we're having I want to say rebound from COVID. The pandemic having, whether or not it's ended, I can't declare that. But to the extent that we've had in the past few years, there's been almost a steady state, and I think now that firms are reevaluating and companies are reevaluating. But I really agree and like your point about strategic partnerships, strategic selection, that I think we're going to see. We're still seeing more work shift in-house and to ALSPs. So I'm wondering, how much of the spend is we're litigation. And Brad, I think we brought this up previously in a live one. A lot of litigation was put on hold for a year, almost 2 years. So it's possible that some of this external spend is all those prior cases are now moving forward. So people are starting to expect that spend will go up there as well. Again, this is just speculation. I can't speak as to accuracy of that, but I think, my gut is telling me that there's both the strategic move and, just things coming out of hibernation during what happened during COVID.
I think those are some interesting points. And so what I'm hearing, and what I think too, is that there's really sort of some tension going on out there. There's sort of more regulatory issues to deal with, more litigation to deal with. I saw a number that the other day that second request, HSR second request went up substantially over the past year or so. So there's that driving budgets up. On the other hand, legal ops people are getting better at driving budgets down through, the levers that they can pull. As you mentioned, actually, ALSPs, bringing work in house, other things using technology. So I think we're going to see this sort of weird, up and down data for a while. Maybe that's why, still only less than 20% see no change in their budget from year to year. And, everybody starts with last year's budget. There's pulls in both directions. And so one of the factors I want us to talk about a little bit is law firm rates. And we asked the audience, what do you expect your law firm rates to do over the past 12 months? A small percentage believe that they're actually going to go down. A pretty small percentage believe they're going to go flat. But 92% of our respondents believe that their rates are going to increase. Half of that group, less than 5%, which still could be substantial, but 41% believe that it's going to go up. Their rates are going to go up more than 5%, which is even in today's sort of inflationary times, that's a pretty good chunk. So, Jerry, why don't you kick us off this time? What do you see out there?
I think that this seems, again, I think that we're still seeing course correction from COVID. Although for the 6.8% that are seeing their fees decrease, I would love to have the referrals to the partners of those firms so I can hire them, because I would love for fees to go down.
I'm guessing actually that's that those might be law departments that are changing firms. If they're getting more sophisticated in which firms they're hiring, then the overall rates could go down. That's my only guess there.
Yeah, I personally, I think some of these are departments that stayed flat or did not increase much during the pandemic time, but also we're looking at these increases and whether we like it or not, inflation has been a little higher than we've been used to. So an increase of 4 to 6% is not, I don't want to say it's unreasonable, because I can't say that as to on a global basis, but it could be simple cost of doing business. If you're going from I'll pick a rate nobody has done. If you're going from $100 to $106, that's an increase of 5% or more. But so I think there is some sort of inflationary pressure here, as there are other requirements to meet and beat. Now, whether that, and Ashley, I think you have a really good opinion on this. I think the question is at the very high end, are they expecting rate increases as well? Because if you're going from a lawyer that's $1,500 an hour who now is, is trying to increase $200 more an hour, there's a certain point where people just go, you know what, I can't deal with this anymore.
Yeah, I think so, certainly. I think that's where the vendor management programs and the legal ops professionals are adding additional value of demonstrating what the strategy is around which firms and timekeepers are associated with those higher rates, and are they meeting the business requirements and needs. I think there is, like you said, inflation across the board. I do think that there's a greater expectation around those hourly billing models and showing the ROI and demonstrating what the firm is and those professionals are bringing to the table. And still, I think that we said this before, I think there's a pendulum swing after kind of COVID and the relax, as people are coming back to work and they're refreshing their rates. They're looking at their graduation rates. They're looking at timekeepers that maybe they put on hold before. So where you're seeing a year over year smaller percentage for those companies that haven't done rate adjustments for 5 years, then you're going to see a big jump, right? Because you're increasing the time over which, and then the inflation compounded. So I'm not surprised by this. I think as we look in the future to results, identifying where the hourly rates and timekeeper rates are changing in a court, and how maybe alternative fee arrangements are coming into the mix, and how those are compared or potentially looked at compared to those hourly rate structures is something to keep an eye on.
And Brad, before you jump in, I actually have one more thought, and I've thought this now for several years. When we see these increases, more and more firms have more and more companies have requirements that first and second year associates don't do work on their projects. You know, please do not bill us for the work of a first-year associate or a second-year associate. So, you know, those people do cost money. I mean, you've seen the increases in first-year starting salaries at AmLaw 100 firms. They're very high. So where do they recoup that money? They increase the partner level salary, partner level pricing to cover the fact that they're effectively training. Now, this has been going on for several years, but I think that's a big portion of fee increases as well, because, you know, we all know that that a senior partner is not going through and reviewing that 10-page and 10-page document. They're signing it to a first year, but they're billing out the senior partner's rates. So, you know, sorry for spoiling the secret there, if anybody thought that that wasn't happening, but I am, you know, and again, just speculation, but I know that I'm guessing that part of this is covering that change, that hidden cost.
Yep, I'm sure it is. So, you know, there's a partner question alongside this one that we don't ask, which I think we're going to start asking next year. We ask how do you expect your overall law firm rates to change? We don't ask how much do you expect your law firms to try to change their rates over the next 12 months, right? So there is a factor of, you know, there is the give and take, the yin and yang between the law firms and the law departments negotiating rate increases, which brings us to our next topic, which is the relationships between outside counsel and other providers. So I want to come through a couple data points here, and then we'll pause for another discussion. 3 questions in a row. Outside counsel generally makes strong efforts to understand the substantive legal issues we face as a law department. 87% say that that's true, that they agree with that statement, that outside counsel do make efforts to understand the legal issues. I'm not sure how those 13% of law firms survive. This feels like table stakes to me, but nevertheless. Yet when we ask, do your law firms see around corners and subject proactive steps to mitigate risk, the number drops precipitously. Still a majority, but only 54% say that their law firms do see around corners. And actually that number is lower than it was last year, but it's still 54%. 87% say they do the substantive legal work okay. Only 54% say they help them see around corners. And then when we ask, are law firms leveraging technology to deliver legal services more effectively and cost efficiently, the number drops even further. Only 28% say that their law firms are leveraging technology to deliver legal services more effectively. And I will tell you, when we do similar surveys of law firms, that number, asking themselves if they do, that number is a lot higher. So law firms tend to believe that they are using technology to deliver legal services efficiently. Law departments are not agreeing. Jerry, you made the mistake of kind of chuckling there, so I'll pick on you first.
No, thank you, Brad. I appreciate that, because this is like when I ask myself the question, am I attractive? And I say yes, and then I hear my wife yell from the other room, but you're a doofus. So I don't know if it's quite the perfect question to ask.
Well, Jerry, if you're asking yourself if you're attractive out loud in earshot of your wife, then I think she's probably right.
I probably deserve it. So going back to the first one, I just want to touch on that. I do, you know, thinking about this more, and I thought about this overnight, you know, I think that this really represents that 13% or the 14.9% involves the slice of the market that doesn't have to understand what you do as a law department. You know, your insurance defense company, if you're involved and the insurance company is paying for it, they have a job. It's not to understand what you do. And this is not a defense or a promotion of that, but their job is going to be different than my true outside counsel, my trusted advisor. So I wonder how much of that is part of that. You know, do they not have that trusted advisor firm, or is it more of is it something else? So on the other two, I think going to see around corners and the next one, I think we're seeing, you know, this pandemic. I don't know what else to call it other than a pandemic honeymoon. end, that where all these law firms felt, oh, I've been doing all this stuff, I'm able to get ahead of these. And I really do think, despite the fact that, that I really do think, and I appreciated it during the pandemic or during the early days, I was getting constant updates from law firms. Here's what you have to do. Here's what to think about. And if you had asked me this question then, I would have said, oh my God, they're ahead of everything. They're thinking about everything I'm thinking about. So I think the sea around corners has changed. The leveraging technology, I think that's also running into the post-pandemic honeymoon ending. And all of a sudden we're saying, hey, you did a good job for shifting over in March 2020. But now we want to see how you're using these tools and actually using them, and not just sitting on them waiting for something to happen.
Well,
Yeah,
I
no,
also think in that there's the legal ops community really stepped up, right, during the pandemic. And there was so much technology innovation supporting remote work, supporting looking at timekeepers, contract lifecycle management, all of the things that I think before the pandemic people had wanted to do, but maybe wasn't getting prioritized. Now, when people were out of the office, they had to have technology. I think the leadership understood that the technology enablement was critical for them to actually continue to do business. So I think the legal ops community stepped up and did a lot of work in-house to enable technology. And then they looked at their outside counsel and they're like, what are you guys doing? Wait, you're not stepping up. And I think there's a disconnect in terms of how quickly in-house teams pivoted and shift and embedded technology and integration and that enablement. And now they're reflecting back on their providers and saying, it's time for you guys to really step up and do this as well.
So we have a question from the audience that although I'm not 100% sure if it's a question or more of a comment, but I'll ask it anyway. I'm sure it's back to that first slide we showed. Should every external provider not understand the client's business context and objectives, not just the trusted advisors, to be able to deliver value, service, and support? And I think you pointed out, Jared, like mostly.
Yeah, I'm actually, it's a really good question, Melissa, who asked it. And I'm thinking that, yes, of course they should, but then there's some that just, I feel, don't need to be as involved. Fortunately or unfortunately, if you've got an employment discrimination claim, you may not care. You may just say, get rid of this for me, and I'll turn over whatever you need. But then I mean, you want to go to your actual employment firm and say, hey, what can we do better so this doesn't happen? But the insurance company is going to assign to you whoever they feel like, or whoever matches the needs at that time. But I don't disagree with Melissa's question. I think they should make that effort. They should know what's going on. But I think there's a later question in the survey, Brad, that we've discussed before, which is about, and I don't want to preempt that, but it's more about how do they actually interact, and whether it's difficult to move over from your existing firm to a new firm in a timely manner without changing significant portions of your daily operations. Again, that's something that law department operations or legal operations professionals could help with, but it may not be a perfectly, a one-day switchover. It may take several weeks to months, if not years.
Right. I think that makes sense. I think that does make sense. And, one thing that I think we should think about is, not every client makes it easy for their firms, or shall I use the term vendors, to become full partners in that way, right? I think we've all been in those situations where the client is just like, just do this, like just review the documents, like, and so, which leads me to sort of our next little section of questions, which is the last three data points were really around sort of the classic LDOs complaining about what their law firms are doing and not doing. But in my opinion, I think there's at least some cases where LDO, legal ops people, should maybe look inward a little bit. So let's explore that a little bit. We provide law firms with feedback about how well they're doing. Only half of our respondents say that they do that they reach back to their law firms, let them know how they're doing. We ask if they have consistent metrics that they use to evaluate their outside counsel. Only 43% evaluate using consistent metrics. Do they share those metrics with outside counsel, with their outside counsel and ALSPs? Only 24% do share their metrics with outside counsel and ALSPs. And I think the capper on this little section here is, if I do this right, is do you feel the law firms make effective use of the information with the metrics you do provide? Very few believe that they even make effective use when they do provide the metrics, which may explain the whole situation. So, Ashley, I'm going to start with you this time. What can law departments do? I mean, it's almost like that old Jerry Maguire quote, like, help me, help you. Like, what can law departments do to help their law firms, do better for them?
I chuckle actually, Brad, as you know, I lead a Deloitte a legal operations survey that we also do annually, and these numbers matched up to the numbers that we had as well. This last year, we showed that only 35% of respondents had KPIs that were actually reported on, and over half of the respondents, 53%, don't have any technology to actually enable metrics or reporting. So I think if the law departments want their providers to behave differently, to act differently, to have greater DE&I, to talk about the productivity of the cases that they're running and their attorney to legal assistant ratio, someone needs to track it. If the law departments track it, they can force greater behavior that they want to see from their law firms. I don't want to be a pessimist, but I haven't seen law firms proactively report things when they're not pushed to do so. I think there's a traditional hourly model. How many hours are those associates billing? They have a mark, 2,800 hours or, whatever it is in their law firm. And they're going to continue to do that until corporations and law departments force a different legal service delivery model for their business strategy. Jerry, I don't know if you have other comments or thoughts there.
No, I mean, what you just said reminds me of when I was much younger and clerking, and my judge told the law firm that if they wanted someone to work on the weekend, the partners could do it themselves. And that the associates were not to work on anything for the case during the weekend. And I don't know if the judge really had that authority, but to that end, I think it's true. I think metrics are hard. Making use of this data is difficult. And if you can't give a compelling case, I feel also there's not a real reason to change. We see significant investment in DEI. So there has been a significant push on diversity and inclusion. So so we know that having the metrics and tracking it is possible, but where does that, how do we bring that to other sections of the relationship? Yeah.
Well, and what do you do with it? I mean, you can have paralysis by analysis. Suddenly you have 100 different metrics you're tracking, but why? What's the purpose of them? What action are you going to take? And are you actually going to take it? There's a lot of carrot and stick. I think in this scenario, we have I see a lot of law departments tracking things, and they're seeing behavior that they say that they don't want. Are they doing anything about it? And I think that's a kind of a come to heart conversation about what are the metrics that we're truly tracking, what's important to our business, and what actions are we going to take on those metrics in-house as well as looking at your external counsel. It's not just kind of bashing the external counsel or the vendors, but also the in-house metrics and what actions are being taken.
No, and I think this partially answers, I'm sure Brad's about to bring it up. Yeah, I was going to say it's unless you ask. I was going to say, so there's a question in there. I don't know if you want to read it, Brad, or if we want to address it now.
Did it make the deck, Jerry? I don't remember. I don't think we put that one in the deck. But you're talking about what percentage fire people will fire their firms?
No. In the Q&A, someone Keith asked, how often do legal ops execs make clear what transparency and updates they want and when they want it, and how he feels like there's a lot of waiting. And I think that's true. I think there is a lot of, I think that fits in. And again, with what Ashley said, you don't know unless you ask. So you have to go ask. And if you don't have the answer, then you got to go get an answer. And sorry, did I jump ahead of something, Brad?
No. I actually I didn't notice the Q&A was, I didn't notice that. I don't know who invited Keith for starters, but.
Yeah. Well, I didn't, that's why I didn't mention anything more. I just said a person
No, I
asked.
just didn't see the question. So let's clean that up. Keith asks, how often do legal ops execs make clear what updates or transparency they want and how, when they want it? I feel like there's a lot of waiting for the other side to do what you want on both sides of the table. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that for sure. I think that's part of the issue here. That's part of what we're trying to kind of get across, which is that there's a lot of like our law firms aren't doing this. We want our law firms to do that, and then it's like, well, have you asked them to? And well, no, like we just kind of want them to. I also will say, and I'm curious what you guys think about this, Ashley and Jerry, is that question assumes that like they know what it is they want and know how to enunciate the ask. And I think that's a big challenge in law departments too. Like they say they want to spend, they feel like they should spend less. And by the end of the whatever process, the question comes out as, can we get a discount on our rates? And they're not really able to ask for what they want very well. They don't know what they want maybe, or can enunciate it. Have you guys seen that out there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it's the simple question to ask when you're not pushing for a more complex and cohesive answer. Just give me a rate reduction. That's not necessarily going to reduce your cost if you're not looking at the partner to attorney ratio or how they're enabling technology. But I think it's a flag that maybe procurement can wave. Hey, look, we reduced the timekeeper rates by 5%. And then leadership is like, well, why did our legal costs go up 20%? Well, because you're not managing how they're actually doing the work. I think the pricing structure and the timekeeper rates are one lever to pull, but it's certainly not the only lever. And if that's the only lever you're pulling, you're missing out on a really great opportunity to work with your providers more strategically to make sure that they're doing efficient work, not just lower hourly rated work.
Right. And I would say it's also the simplest lever to pull. It's like the big red one that's really easy to reach, and not necessarily the best one to pull all the time. I want to move on to our next section. Before I do, one thing that I think is interesting to think about, and this is definitely a 3-drink discussion at some point, is in other industries, the market does that for you, and in the automotive industry, like you don't expect the buyers to be like, well, why is my car company not putting the cup holders where I want them, right? Like some other car company will put more cup holders in, and then they're going to take market share, right? And so I think a good question is something we should think about is, to what extent are law firms leaving opportunities on the table to build and pitch as opposed to wait only for their clients to ask for things? I think that's a topic of a whole new webinar, but I think it's worth thinking about a little bit. Ashley, you mentioned that a lot of folks don't have the right technology to track what they need. So let's use that as our segue and move on a little bit and talk about law department technology. Despite me making fun of you, thanks for the questions, Keith, and everybody else, please keep them coming. We ask if they have a multi-year legal tech strategy or roadmap. And finally, after years and years, about half of our respondents say they do, and another 40% say they're planning on. This is up from last year. The numbers were equally strong, or almost equally strong. Previous years, it was a third every year. So we are finally starting to see more and more law departments starting to be more strategic about what they're doing with technology. Jerry, I think that part of that is just as legal tech matures a little bit and becomes more buyer driven as opposed to seller driven all the time. Is that what you think too? What do you think?
I think that's it. I think we're getting folks in now for legal ops and law department operations, whatever you want to call it, that are now coming in, not just I was here and now I'm managing budgets, but they're coming in with MBAs. They're coming in with practicing lawyers who have done this. They're coming in with all this additional knowledge, and all of a sudden they're saying, let me build the plan. Let's make this work correctly. But I also think, you know, every year I've been to over the past few years, Legal Week or Legal Tech, Clock, all of these keep getting bigger and there's more knowledge being shared. And I think folks are finally waking up. And again, I think we're seeing the outcome of work from home, that all of a sudden people were saying, you know, this is an actual problem we need to deal with. We don't want to go back to the office. We don't want to have, you know, all this. We don't want people doing this. But I think I'm very confused about what just happened, but Brad, there's someone in your room with you.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
I just looked up and all of a sudden something happened.
It's the extremely rare day my kids are home.
Oh, but I think that's really a big part of it, is that you're getting folks now who are experienced with this, who have training, who have done it before, and they're beginning to start taking the knowledge they've gained and learned and bring it with them as they transfer between new roles and discover and being able to enforce that in new positions.
Well, I also think that historically, when you look at the technology within a legal department, it has been point solutions to solve things that people were upset about. You have an e-discovery tool, you have a matter management tool, you have an e-billing tool, you have a lot of siloed tools. And as there's further consolidation of the tools themselves, but I think also realistically, as IT is moving into legal and pushing enterprise type solutions and thinking, I think of, you know, Salesforce, ServiceNow, larger enterprise tools. They're critically asking questions around what is the holistic solution of how legal is doing the work. And definitely to your point, the legal ops professionals are coming in with a more strategic umbrella over bringing the tools together, consolidating those tools, creating process efficiencies, taxonomies that, you know, are ripe. I think user adoption is the challenge when you're talking about anything related to technology within the legal department.
Good. So
100% agree on user adoption being the biggest challenge. Change management is always the biggest challenge.
Yeah. So we ask each year our respondents about a bunch of different legal technologies, and we ask how effective those tools are. And we ask them to rate on a 1 to 10 scale. And I will say generally this year, those numbers are down a good half point to a point generally across the board. I think actually you might have pointed out already some of the reasons why that might be: frustration with point solutions, and maybe even just more strategic legal ops people who know what to expect a little better than maybe what some of the folks in the past are. I do want to point out some of the lower numbers are around document management, document assembly are especially low. Electronic records management is also on the low side, as well as knowledge management. All of those, in my opinion, all of those are kind of related. You know, knowledge management, records management, document assembly, they're all sort of related. And I think in some instances are especially difficult to drive adoption of, which is sort of the point you were just making, Ashley. So, you know, is that the biggest issue? Is that our biggest impediment to effectiveness, is the driving of adoption and training?
Yes, but I think if we look at these solutions, I don't know, and I would love to have a legal department, an in-house legal department, that say that they actually have a document management system that is used and everyone loves. Most of the clients that I've worked with in the last 2 years are thinking about document management the way that they maybe did when they were in a law firm. And when you're in a law firm and creating the document, that's a different use case for a document management system. Most of the in-house team members that I work with are receiving documents, and that's a different type of use case of how you're using these systems that a traditional iManage or other document management system that are, you know, in a law firm are used to. I also think there is a big disconnect and misunderstanding of what document management is versus knowledge management. So I use an analogy around a library. So if you think of content management, content is the book on the shelf. That's holding the information. Those are your articles, your content articles. A document management system is simply the card catalog at the front of the library telling you where the book is on the shelf. Knowledge management is the librarian in the library where you go and say, I want to learn more about narwhals. Okay, well, you actually want these 3 different books. Page 62, paragraph 2 of this book gives you the best information. People are trying to make a document management system, a knowledge management system, and those are 2 entirely different things. But I think there is a disconnect of understanding of what truly a document management system can and should do versus a broader holistic knowledge management system and solution.
Mm-hmm. Jerry, thoughts?
I'm generally in agreement with Ashley. I think that you have not only are, I think, I want to say many of these document management, document assembly are what we almost think of as first generation legal technology systems. And at a certain point, we've bypassed them with newer systems, whether it's for user interface, for ease of use or something like that. And also many of these functions are now built into other platforms that do more than just one thing. So I'm wondering how much of that is part of these ratings, but also and Ashley, I think mentioned this, the way an in-house lawyer functions and the way an outside counsel function are 2 very different things. And even though you have primarily the highest ranking legal operations or lawyer at the company responding to this, it's clear that there's work to be done in these areas, or they have to move to newer systems that actually do these functions better. I do think for a lot of companies, document management still means SharePoint or Google Drive, and they put everything into a drive. They want a tool that does more, but then they also don't want to have to think about how do I set this up because it's already working. And I know, coming from the CLM perspective, coming from the contract lifecycle management perspective, it is tough to get these changes done. And there is I don't know how else to put it, but almost you don't always have a full view, a full picture of what you need at the time you need it. So this question, you look at it, you go, yeah, I'm happy with my e-billing system, but we're struggling with managing documents. So they're also rating, I think, in some ways comparatively to the other effectiveness of the other tools. So e-billing clearly is very effective. Document assembly and document management, not as effective.
So I want to move on for a minute, and Melissa asked a question. Melissa again asked a question, which I think I'm going to summarize into. It can be challenging to get budget and resources when you're a law department. So let's talk a little bit about what, at least, let's maybe with that lens on it, talk a little bit about what, nevertheless, most of our respondents believe they have at least the basic technology they need to do their job. And there's some reasonably robust numbers in some ways, in some places, on what they plan to update and what they plan over the next 12 months. Pretty strong numbers in this same sort of group: matter, document, and contract management. 30% plus say they plan to evaluate, implement, or update those tools. And then another little group, and you mentioned it, Ashley, a minute ago, the workflow, business process automation tools, and the work service request intake forms. So tools. So maybe real quick, Ashley, we'll start with you, and maybe what are you seeing on that front? I mean, those are some big numbers. What are we? How are law departments changing in those areas?
Oh, I think this is the biggest shift and change that we've seen, and again, I think probably informed by COVID and how people were requesting information or requesting support from the law department. And just the legal operations and law department leadership trying to manage the work that's being done. Is it the highest and best use of the professional's time? Are the right people doing the right work? And as we have IT enterprise systems pushing into the legal department to solve some of these challenges, you have workflow ticketing tools that are trying to bridge that gap. You also have traditional legal technology tools also adding workflow automation or process automation as part of their solution set. So they're trying to respond back to that, right? IT tools pushing into legal tools are like, wait, we're here already. We can do this too. But I think that the challenge with all of this, going back to adoption, is that this is a really big psychological shift for a lot of lawyers and legal departments. The idea of being separated from their customer and having a ticketing system to come in and ask legal questions, and that routing makes a lot of, in my experience and the clients I'm working with, very uncomfortable. They want to have that connection to the business. They want to be able to understand the problem so they can provide strategic legal advice. So what processes, what requests are going through this automation tool set versus when there's someone picking up the phone and getting in contact with someone when they have a serious legal problem? I think that's what's still being worked out right now. I think this is a crawl, walk, run scenario where I have seen it very successfully deployed when you take small bites of the apple of solving some of the issues coming in, NDAs, how those are getting routed, simple templates within CLM, how those are getting routed and integrated. Others I've seen try to boil the ocean or make everything perfect all at once, and that has met with massive resistance from the legal professionals because they feel that separation from their customer and they've lost that conciliary type of model. So, Jerry, I don't know what your thoughts are here.
Muted. I think that's true. I think that's a very, very good point, and something that we've seen a lot at ContractPod AI is that there is this push not to separate, that they want to still have that connection, but also figure out some way to better manage intake, better manage understanding, and also turn that then into knowledge management, document management, outside of just pure CLM, which is now contract lifecycle management's on the screen.
Yeah, so let's we do ask some specific questions about CLM. We ask about maturity, and we're seeing sort of mid-maturity here, on a 5-point scale. 3, most organizations or more a preponderance give themselves a 3. Very few feel they're very mature, but we do feel like we're sort of moving along the curve, both on pre-execution and post-execution contract management. We asked what data they currently track, and I find it interesting a little bit that contract value is the most commonly tracked metric, but there's a whole number that are in play at reasonably high levels. And finally, we asked, and I think this is maybe more important, and this is maybe, Jerry, if I can ask you to speak on this for a minute. We ask which processes, which are among the things they track, is actually how the question is worded, which are the most valuable? And they find contract value to be the most valuable, which I think is interesting and perhaps questionable. Turnaround time is the number 2 answer. Deviation of terms is the number 3 answer. So, Jerry, you're probably the most expert resident in contract management here. So why don't you talk about this for a minute if you can?
Sure, Brad. So I think, I think one of the items, the reason contract value is so important to these folks is because that's steering everything else you're doing. You're probably delaying some contracts based on contract value. You're probably pushing back work based on that. And you want to be able to tell the rest of the company, we helped so-and-so close a major deal and did all this to do that well. The two that really make, so I think contract value, that's an easily reported item. You can give you can report on that right away. You can explain it right away. It's a simple idea. How many contracts over 10 million did we do in the past 6 months? How many contracts over 5 million? Boom, we can report on that. And you're able to go back to the C-suite or back to your colleagues and say, hey, we've been able to move these around very quickly. Here we go. And of course, you combine that with deviation and turnaround time. And now you're able to prove, hey, this is how good we're doing. We're not deviating from terms. We're turning things around in X number of hours, days, or weeks. And so all of these come into come into proving the value for the use cases that most contract lifecycle management customers are asking about. Going off Ashley's point, these are, a lot of these companies are, and the prior slide, many are reporting 3, but a much fuller number are also reporting other, they're not there yet. So, where do we take that? And of course, the first questions I always get are, can we track contract value? Can we track turnaround time? Can we track cycle time? Can we track, what next question? Can we track deviations? How can we know whether we're keeping these? And some of these I think are very similar in many ways, tracking policy deviations or tracking contract obligations are almost fall in that deviation. They kind of mesh into that deviation category, the 41%. But that's the basic underlying of what I think here. But I think value is just an easy number to look at, and you can point to that right away. And the next one, of course, is that cycle time, and that's another easy thing to point out to prove that you're getting ROI.
I think I see one of the things that I'm going to project and what I think people are going to be asking about tracking in the future, certainly when we think about the workforce doing the work, and is it the highest and best use of time, how many escalation points or approvals, or what level of the professional is needed to clear things. I think those points will give legal leadership a better understanding of the talent mix they need to have, if they have contract centers of excellence or just who is in their contract workforce, to better understand that talent mix. So I think those questions will start to be more relevant. Those are questions that I'm certainly hearing from the clients that we're working with in this area.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Ashley. And looking forward, we are hearing the same thing. How can I have these things automatically approved if they match a certain, if your AI finds a clause and it matches our clause, can we have that automatically approved because we don't have to look at that again? Or can we automatically escalate to the appropriate person? Customer wants, the example we always get, and I tend to give, is so-and-so wants unlimited liability. There's no one who can grant that other than the GC or the CEO. So we don't, if that comes in, we push back, they push back, we push back again, they push back again. We're not getting anywhere.
Right.
This should be escalating automatically by the 3rd time we've gone through this, because we don't want unlimited liability, but if the customer won't move, what do we do?
Right.
So rather than it come to Ashley and then go back, and then Brad go back, and then Ashley comes and asks me, do we have some workflow that does this automatically so we can move through this and know what these are? And of course, some of these can be handled with rules and algorithms. Others can be handled with modeling and AI. And some may be manual when it's something you've never seen before, but at least that begins the process of building a response to that.
So guys, we have about 5 minutes left, and I'm hoping we can use them, or at least maybe 4 of them, to talk about some of the future challenges that our audience has identified. So we asked the same question 2 different ways. What are the top 3 challenges you are currently facing or expecting to face in the next 3 years in terms of managing your law department functions? And maybe not surprisingly, although I think a little surprisingly, implementing business process improvements was the #1 answer in both instances, followed by cost containment, which I think I'm a little surprised that wasn't just #1 with a bullet, but those are the far and away the top 2 answers among law department professionals, legal operations professionals. Jerry, we talked about this yesterday, and you say you found some interesting angles, I guess, in the middle of the table. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the top two are what we expect to see. Those are the top 2, but in the middle, we're seeing the increased focus on globalization and how things are changing. Data protection, of course, is growing. Every conversation, every contract now includes some sort of data protection language or involves a DPA or something. But I thought it was interesting, the increase there was very interesting, as well as, we're looking, if you look further down the table, all of a sudden we're seeing new things that started popping up more recently. Again, I can't attribute it to COVID, but there's definitely compliance issues are coming up. Now that could be based on administrative compliance, regulatory compliance, but all of these seem to be much more global and company-wide changes. Your law departments are now not, more law departments are focusing on bringing the global work in-house. So we see that expected to increase in the next 3 years, but also looking at how do we work interdepartmentally? How do we make sure that we do this together? So getting the executive buy-in increased, and also looking up interdepartmental relationships has increased. So I think there's a growing awareness that the law department is not just a law firm within the company, it's part of the actual organization. It's an actual functioning part of the organization that needs to be there, needs to be available, and needs to work together rather than just be off to the side.
So Ashley, we have a minute or so left. If you can, I'll let you take the last word on current and future challenges.
I'm not surprised at all that implementing business process improvements is number one on that list. I mean, I think we've talked at length about the challenge with change management for attorneys and within the law department. I think this is the biggest hurdle that people have. Implementing technology is easy, but actually getting people to use it and creating more efficient processes is really hard because it involves people. And that, I think, is one area that will continue to be a challenge. And it's going to require leadership, executive leadership within the law department to take a hold of the reins and make sure that they are driving that this is important, and that the team members and the lawyers, everyone within the law department, have to buy into this business process improvement plan. I'm afraid I don't think that this is a bottom-up success story. I think this is going to require top-down push to stress the importance of those areas.
Great. All right. So I would like to. So we've reached the top of the hour. I'd like to thank Ashley and Jerry for joining us, and really for, I think, spectacular insights that help us understand what's going on out there. I'd like to thank everyone in our audience for joining us today. I hope you found the session entertaining and edifying. I know that some of the data we went through pretty quickly on screen, but please, if you haven't yet, download our annual survey report. It's at www.ldo15.com. You can just go there and download the report. There's all that data, a whole bunch of new analysis, all kinds of stuff in there that I hope is worth your time and energy, and no cost, of course. So thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Ashley.
Thanks, Jerry.